Hi everybody, welcome to Leading for Life Stories Season 2. My name is Bob Judson and I'm your host for this podcast, and I'm absolutely delighted to have you here joining me. Thanks very much, and I really hope you enjoy what follows. Just before I launch into this week's episode, a quick plea for some support with the podcast. For the past year and a bit, I have done this without any form of membership structure or financial support at all. And I think it's about time I actually changed that. So what I've done is on Patreon, I have created 3 membership tiers to ask for you to consider supporting me. If you value the content I provide, if you think it's been useful to you, if you enjoy it, then I would be really grateful if you would consider just getting in and making a small financial contribution per month on the basis that it helps keep the podcast going. There are costs obviously associated with this, various subscriptions and software and hardware and all those sorts of things that I have to do. So that would be massively appreciated if you are so minded. All you need to do is either find the support the show link, which will be in the notes on your podcast platform of choice. That will certainly take you there. Or alternatively, go to www.patreon.com. That's patreon.com/leading4 and that will take you there. So www.patreon.com/leading4life, and you should find it, and that will give you the option of either becoming a supporter, a champion, or a patron of the show, and all the details are there. Please do consider it. I really would appreciate your help, because it just makes it much easier to continue doing this show. Thanks very much indeed. Off we go. Welcome back, everybody. In episode 59, I kind of set the scene for taking command of Royal Air Force Coningsby, which up to that point was by far and away the biggest job and most expansive challenge I had had. And I set the scene, and I said that there are a number of things that I was going to talk about on various different episodes, and I will build those up over the next few weeks as I do these personal stories. And this time, what I wanted to do in what's part 2 of commanding Royal Air Force Coningsby is talk about aspects of the leadership challenge, the broad strokes of this. So I'm going to come back and talk about building the Typhoon force. I'm going to talk about my flying the Typhoon, my flying on the Battle of Britain Memorial flight, flying the Jaguar again, which was a fantastic thing that happened almost by accident. And I'll get to that again. I'll talk a bit about Quick Reaction Alert, what that's all about for the UK. I'll talk about a few of the big things that went on while I was there, not least of which were leading the Queen's birthday fly past, flying in and monitoring and supervising the Typhoon display when we created a Typhoon display for the first time, and a number of other kind of memorable moments. And last but not least, kind of where I left it and where it's gone to since then, because all of that, I think, is really highly relevant out of my time on this amazing tour. And in 2 years, there was an awful lot of stuff that happened while I was there. But for this one, I thought I'd step back a little bit and talk about some more of the kind of structure and the challenges that emanated from that structure. Because prior to this, running an RAF squadron felt like quite a big deal at the time I was actually doing it. And you're doing a lot of flying, you're doing a lot of very responsible flying, some very challenging stuff. And you've got a bunch of people you're looking after and all the rest of it. But the station thing is a whole different level of complication. For a start, we had 10 different types of airplane at Coningsby, which was quite extraordinary. By the end of my tour, I was flying 5 of those 10 types, which was even more extraordinary. I would never, in my wildest dreams, have expected to be able to do that. But we had Typhoons, and progressively we're building up the number of Typhoons. We got the Jaguar Force there in the end, but we had a Jaguar in the guise of the Fast Jet Weapons Operational Evaluation Unit. Number 41 Squadron was there doing trials work for the Jaguar. We had a Tornado GR4 on the same unit, a Tornado F3, a Harrier GR9, and then on the Battle of Britain Memorial flight, we had the Lancaster, the Dakota, Spitfire, Hurricane, and last but not least, the Chipmunk, which we used to train on. So 10 different aircraft types. No other station in the RAF had that. That was the first thing to say. It was immensely complicated just from managing an airfield where you are having to operate every aspect of that. So the servicing of them, the maintenance, the kind of flying aspects of that, but also the airfield management. When you're flying from an airfield which has got that many diverse types of aeroplanes, it generates some different problems for air traffic control. We had a main runway, we had a grass runway as well, which we could use just for the Chipmunk, which was by the side of the main runway. And obviously, we also had the Tornado F3 Quick Reaction Alert live QRA for the UK, which was a 24/7 function, always there, always on call, and I've had absolute priority when there was a need to go for a live scramble. And I'll come back and I'll talk probably on a separate episode entirely about what QRA is all about, because I think it's a really interesting feature of Air Force activity. So that complexity was evident right from the beginning, and you're very reliant on the people and the structures that you have in place to make sure that everything is working on a daily basis as it should, and there's no hiccups with any of that. And when there are hiccups, and inevitably there are some of the time, you have to just turn around and manage those and find a way through quickly, learn from it, move on, and keep the show on the road, because that's obviously a key element to what we do. In terms of the structures that supported that, we obviously had 17 Squadron. That was the Typhoon Operational Evaluation Unit. That was mainly at this stage, early stage of my tour, was based up at Wharton. When we moved the force down completely and started building up properly, then they were also on the base. But they were the ones that were flying the aircraft out of BAE Systems Wharton up in Preston, although their headquarters was down with me. We had number 41 Squadron, which was the Fast Jet and Weapons Operational Evaluation Unit, and that was also based there. That was obviously the one flying the Tornadoes, both Marks and the Jaguar and the Harrier. And both those units, 17 Squadron and 41 Squadron, were actually working for the Air Warfare Centre. So they were lodger units for me on the station. Administratively, I looked after them, but operationally, I didn't. I didn't get involved in their tasking or anything else that went with that. At the early stages, we didn't have any other frontline squadrons there other than we had the detachment of the Quick Reaction Alert with the Tornado F3. Over time, over the 2-year period, we built 3 Squadron first, which was the frontline squadron, and 11 Squadron followed that as the 2 frontline squadrons that were there. But before any of that happened, we had to start training people to fly the aeroplane on a more kind of industrial scale, if you like. Previously, we'd worked up alongside BAE Systems with 17 Squadron and their test pilots to train a few pilots. They were the ones that were on 17 Squadron. But we had to create an operational conversion unit. And that was number 29 Squadron. And that was the first Typhoon unit that formed on the base. And I'll talk a lot more about what I did with them and how that worked when I talk about flying the Typhoon myself in a subsequent episode. And later in my tour, we ended up with number 6 Squadron, the squadron I had commanded at RAF Coltishall, moving from RAF Coltishall as it closed as a base and moving the last of the Jaguar force across to Coningsby to see out its time for the next year or so that they were there before the Jaguar force finally closed down. We also had the Battle of Britain Memorial Flight, which had been there throughout and was obviously a self-contained unit. That was also interesting because BBMF, because obviously of the public profile and visibility of it, it's unusual on an RAF base in that it has its hangar is right next to the airfield perimeter fence, and it has a visitor center off the base, and then a kind of public access onto the base to come in and do tours of the hangar and visit what was going on. So obviously you're working a very secure military base with all sorts of really sensitive stuff, and at the same time you've got this kind of public access element that's a feature of it, which we had to manage. Most airfields have that because they'll have a so-called spotter's car park, and somewhere at either one or both ends of the runway where aircraft enthusiasts come and watch and take numbers and track airplanes and watch what's going on. And that's a very, very active thing at any military airfield. There is usually a significant community of people, and they've got the most amazing network in terms of understanding what's going on. So you can guarantee that the moment something special is happening, they would always be there in force. And because we had the Battle of Britain Memorial Flight, then that was obviously a very special attraction for aircraft enthusiasts anyway. So we would see a great deal of those a lot of the time there. That generated an interesting little challenge as well. But then you go from the squadrons and the aircraft operations bits into the wings, and the wings on the base support all of the activities. So we have an operations wing, which basically ran the airfield, so looking after not least air traffic control, but also all of the other airfield functions to make sure that the airfield can do what it's required to do to be able to turn around and operate aeroplanes. And that's quite a big job. I mean, all of these different support functions are run by a wing commander, and so a senior officer working directly for me, looking after what we were doing on the base. A base support wing, which in old money would be called administrative wing or administration wing, that was again run by a wing commander, looked after all of the administration functions for everybody that was there. So all the personnel, 2,500 of them roughly, that were on the base, they would fall under admin wing in terms of their personnel support for every function that goes with that, and that would include things like the supply squadron functions and so on. Would be working into a combination of administrative support and also actually forward support. So they would work with the engineers on the forward support wing, another wing commander function that looked after keeping the aircraft operational and working day to day. And behind that, you had then, not least for Typhoon specifically, we had the depth support build up. So the deeper servicing, heavily linked in terms of contracting with industry, to work with industry to be able to turn around and provide capability that put the airplanes through a much deeper level of servicing, just like you take your car to have a different level of service periodically. Airplanes are no different. They require quite a lot of day-to-day maintenance just to keep them flying, and in the most simple form, that's check the tires, put the fuel and the oil in, etc. But the reality is then over time they require a much deeper level of servicing, and when they go to a full major servicing, that's a really significant thing. You take the aircraft apart quite substantially and put it back together again, and obviously a lot of that is checking for fatigue to make sure that the airplane is still airworthy, etc., as it goes on. So all of that was building up on the base, and a bit that I haven't mentioned yet was also the simulation support, the training side of this, the Typhoon training facility, which was again building up alongside 29 Squadron as we started the conversion unit. That was the simulators, the ground school, everything that went to actually enable us to convert and keep current pilots on the airplane. And there's no small amount of effort that goes into all of those different functions. There's a lot of moving parts, and because of that, you've got a leadership team with each of those functions I've mentioned having either a squadron leader in some instances, or more often a wing commander that were running either the frontline squadron elements or the major wings that supported everything on that, all the functions on the base. And that leadership team would work directly for me as an executive group. We would meet generally weekly and would talk about what was going on, what we needed to do, where we had any challenges, and would help each other to turn around and make sure we worked through all of those. And often very, very collegiate in terms of the structure. We were all on a set of common purposes. We knew what we had to do. We had a big responsibility, particularly in building up the Typhoon force, but also all the other things that were going on. And I've mentioned, obviously, we had that operational evaluation unit for all the other types. And obviously we had the historic side on the Battle of Britain Memorial flight. So one of the first things we did was work up a revised mission statement for, if you like, for the base, because it was quite important to have a kind of focus that everyone was looking at. And the one we came up with, which I think worked really well actually, and was a big sign at the main gate and so on to capture this, which was, RAF Coningsby's mission was to deliver the future, develop the present, and commemorate the past of the Royal Air Force's combat air power. And that did capture it quite neatly. Typhoon was the future. We were definitely at that stage delivering that future capability. We were developing the present in the guise of what was going on with the operational evaluation units to continue developing tactics, enhancing the capability for going on for all of the other current combat types. And we were obviously commemorating the past in the guise of flying the Battle of Britain Memorial flight. So we worked very closely together as a senior team to ensure that we did everything we could to not trip over each other, to conflict with each other, to make sure that everything was working as smoothly as it possibly could. As you can imagine, with a brand new airplane, we had lots of external additional scrutiny and also external visits and things coming in to look at what was going on. A huge amount of interest, not least from an export point of view with Typhoon, looking at what was actually happening with it and where we were trying to look at selling it to other air forces. So a ton of activity that went along with trying to make that work. And I used to joke a lot with my leadership team, and I think it's one of those leadership points that is valid outside the military as well in any hierarchical organization. I used to say, look, we're here to preserve democracy, not to practice it. We did not have a consensus requirement around the executive table. I would work very hard to have closed door meetings with my team where we would thrash out in pretty tough conversations some of the time, difficult decisions that we needed to try and get to and agree on. And if we could agree, that was lovely. Perfect. Ideal outcome, consensus, and you have something you can move forward that everyone's agreeing to it. If we didn't agree, though, there was a hierarchy, and I was at the top of that hierarchy on the base, and therefore I would make the decision. And ultimately what I did, my absolute expectation for the team was, look, once we've had this discussion, you've had your chance to air it. We've had the kind of conflict stage of working this through. Now we're going to walk out and we're going to have an agreed position. And pretty much without exception, I can't remember a time when that didn't work. I think it actually worked really, really effectively to be able to do that. But you have to allow people to air some of their grievances and some of their issues. If they feel that they haven't been heard, they haven't been listened to, you don't care about what they think, then that's a challenge, and it generates bigger challenge downstream as well. So finding a way to make sure you're airing that is really, really important. But the other thing that was really important was making sure that you did actually deliver on empowerment. These individuals were senior officers running their own piece of the base. I was very conscious, having been on that journey myself up to get to that point, that I didn't like it when the station commander of the time, wherever I was kind of micromanaging my business, or my squadron commander was micromanaging my business. And, I wanted to be in a position where I told them what we needed to do, and we'd agreed what we were going to do, and we had a clear plan, and then they got on with it. They had, under the kind of mission command structure that exists in the military, you're telling someone what to do, not how to do it. That at the end of the day, you're giving them the remit to go and operate in the within the agreed framework they've got, and then how they do it, what they do, as long as they get the results, you are not meddling with what they do, and you're not micromanaging, long screwdrivering, another great military term, where you're sticking a very long screwdriver down from range into their business. And so empowering and delegating was a really, really key element of my job. And it was also key to emphasize to the wing commanders that they needed to do that further down the stream as well. They couldn't take all this stuff on themselves. They needed to make sure that they gave every opportunity to the other people that were working for them to really deliver on that and get a good result. And because particularly with Typhoon, where we had a new aeroplane, and therefore we didn't have all the answers, we certainly didn't know everything we needed to know at that stage. We didn't know what the aeroplane could do. We didn't know how to get the best out of it in every sense. And that's not just out of operating it, that's in servicing practices and all the rest of it. So actually providing empowerment right down to really junior levels, and turning around and going, okay, the end game is we're trying to fly this airplane as effectively and as efficiently and with the maximum amount of flying hours per maintenance hour, et cetera, that we can get. How do we do that? And what was amazing is when you actually open up the kind of aperture to people to be able to do that, they deliver some incredible results for you. They will find ways based on their own experience and the things that they've done in the past and the things that they can look at and go, yeah, Jill, what about if we try it this way? And obviously, sometimes you have to be careful. You have to make sure it's safe and you're not doing anything that's completely outlandish. But very, very often you develop much, much better procedures as a result of opening it up to take people's ideas and embrace them, let them have a go, let them see if they work. And then at the same time, obviously celebrate their success, reward them for doing that, because they need to feel they're getting the credit for something that's been done, been created, been resolved by quite often somebody quite far down the pecking order in terms of the hierarchy on the base. And hugely important to give them that credit, say thank you, give them the public praise to acknowledge where that's happened. And again, particularly with a new airplane, that was massively important because there was huge opportunity for that, huge opportunity on a daily basis to develop the capability as we moved it forward. Industry can go so far. They can build the airplane. They can turn around and do the test flying side of it. They can create a set of procedures that say this is how we think it should work. But actually, when you bring it to operational practice and you start thinking about how you're going to turn around and operate it on a frontline base, then there's a whole load of things you had to turn around and find workarounds for, just to make sure that you were able to get it airborne efficiently, make it work, deliver the ultimately the frontline capability that you needed. So it was a really, really key aspect of what we were doing. In terms of leadership styles and things as well, I was very much into people bring solutions, not problems. Don't come up the leadership ladder with just a problem. Think it through first. Look, if you've been empowered and you've had a delegation given to you to turn around and try and resolve it, then try very hard to resolve it. Come up to me when you've got a genuine problem you can't get any further with, and you need my help to either give you a greater set of remit to to be able to expand your box, if you like, to be able to do the task you've been given, or to seek help, external help, if we're really stuck and we need to go and do that. But where you can, then turn around and come up with a clear solution to something, rather than actually just being one of these individuals that comes up with, we can't do this because. That doesn't help. It makes it very difficult. And I think in terms of the way people look at you as a prospective leader, if you're the sort of person that brings solutions rather than problems to the table, then you're much more likely to get the right kind of credit for the right things. And that's, again, I think really important. I think the other thing I learned very, very early on in the Coningsby role was that my behavior set the mood, and I could almost commit thought crime in a couple of different ways. One was if I'd been dealing with something difficult, so either something personally difficult or more often than not, professionally difficult, something had gone wrong, or there had been a disciplinary issue or whatever, then I would quite often be walking out of the office, walking down the corridor and seeing people who I hadn't seen that day, that week, that month, whatever. And very quickly they would look at me and say, "Morning, sir." And I'd, if I didn't have a smile on my face and a positive view, and it's going back to the morning, "How are you? Great to see you today." That kind of response, then that sour mood that you could project would actually cascade very quickly through the structure. And that was not a good place. So you at the top of the hierarchy, you have an absolutely key role in setting the mood for the for the unit. And that was, I think, again, is something that translates across. It's not a military specific point. I think if you are a leader, think about your own behavior. Think about how you are actually conducting yourself and the example you are setting and the message you are sending out, possibly even subliminally. And I'm not talking necessarily about you standing there and speaking to people. It's your body language. It's the way you're dressed. It's the way you look at people. It's facial expressions. All those things matter, and they really do matter in a senior leadership kind of role where you definitely are setting the mood for everyone else. And the other related point in terms of that behavioral thought crime kind of thing was I found quite quickly I could walk past things and walk around things on the base particularly when I was doing. We used to do a thing called station commanders inspections, where periodically you'd go around and visit all of the units, and it was the object of it was for that particular unit to have a bit of a spring clean and make sure that they were constantly keeping their environment as it should be. And it also offered an opportunity for them to bring to the station commander's attention anything they felt needed doing. It was a great opportunity for me to meet people as well, who I wouldn't necessarily always come into contact with on a regular basis. So they were really useful things. But on those inspections, quite often, if I commented about something and I was effectively just thinking aloud, I wasn't really making any kind of formal, "I want something done about it" comment. I would just be making a remark. Then the next thing, I'd come back and I'd be there a few weeks later and I'd go, "What happened to that?" And said, "Well, you didn't like it, so we changed it." And I was very conscious that, you had to be really careful about thinking about how you verbalized anything you were thinking about in that context, because you needed to be clear. Look, I'm just basically sounding out ideas here. I want your thoughts. I don't want you to turn around and do anything. This is just me thinking aloud, and be really transparent about that, rather than let them get to a place where suddenly something's changed and you kind of wish it hadn't. Two other things that I think are really relevant in this space. One is, I often talk when I train people about this. I think if you're in the leadership role, protecting your team is really, really important. For me, it's almost point number one. I used to very much talk about, and still do talk about, putting up umbrellas for the teams that I work for. So I'm essentially providing an umbrella over the top of you, which I will protect you from stuff coming in from external sources, whether it's higher authority, whether it's other outside influences, etc. And I will do my absolute utmost to make sure that I am looking after my team, because I'm in charge of it and I'm going to protect you. As long as you are doing what you've been asked to do within the rules, and you're not deliberately breaching those rules, and you're not doing something really kind of egregiously stupid that is clearly, obviously, indefensible, And as long as when something goes wrong, you tell me about it before someone tells me about it from an external source. Because obviously, if I find out from someone externally that something's gone on, I can do very little about it. And and that becomes really challenging at that point. So I think that protection piece, particularly from the higher authority world, is really important. And I'll, on a separate podcast on the Coningsby side, I will talk more about some examples of that, where I think there are some specific things that I'll come back to, because I think it is such a key element of being a senior leader in this space. Managing the higher authority piece was obviously a big challenge with that. I would try not to do all of that myself. I had, as I've already mentioned, I had some lodger units who didn't work directly for me, so they obviously had to go and deal with their own higher authorities quite regularly, and without me getting in the way of that. And I had my own direct connection to the headquarters of Number One Group, which was where the base, my direct line management, if you like, was my air officer commanding at Number One Group, and making sure that they were, in the broader sense, happy with what we were doing was key. But equally, making sure they weren't doing crazy things some of the time, where you had to be quite robust back up to the leadership. And a good example of that would be, particularly with Typhoon, when it was news, so much interest in almost everything. If someone sneezed, people wanted to know about it, and therefore it was a big factor. But because of that, people quite often were quite lazy in the structures of the headquarters, where they would actually turn around and say, "Can you send us information about this, 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 and this?" And I'd be going back some of the time and saying, "We've already sent you all of that. If you looked at these documents we sent you last month, or these routine pieces of paperwork we send you, you will have all that information. So what you need to do is you need to go and find it within what you already have in the headquarters. Don't ask us to do it again and do it as a bespoke piece of work." And I found, from a leadership point of view, it's really important to be not overtly aggressive about that, but robust about it, making sure that, I didn't suffer fools where there were fools involved. I needed to be quite clear that I was going to turn around and make sure I was looking after the team to the absolute best of my ability. And talking about that, looking after the team bit, work versus play here is hugely, hugely important. One of the features at a base like Coningsby, and it's certainly not unique, plenty of other bases very similar to this, is the geography. Is you have the base structure inside the wire. You have the officers' mess and the sergeant's mess, and the airmen's accommodation is typically inside the wire, and all of the technical accommodations, all the squadrons, everything else, obviously that's inside the secure area of the base. More often than not, you'll have the family quarters, the housing for families would be off the base, and sometimes you had satellite units and bits. And I had RF Woodall Spa, was a old disused airfield that we had as a sort of satellite unit for Coningsby, where we had a number of functions that we would carry on over there, and that required some looking after as well. And also from a personnel point of view, I had a lot of people who lived, particularly married ones, who might live on the base during the week, and then were living away at the weekend, and they so quite a migratory lifestyle. And so it was really important to build that team cohesion by having a kind of a decent structure across the rank structure, and merging the rank structure on occasion. So mixing up all ranks events and things like that, but equally being involved and conscious of what was happening in the officers' mess, what was happening in the sergeant's mess, what was happening in the airmen's mess, in terms of trying to ensure that everyone had an opportunity to let off steam, to enjoy the successes of what we'd done, to build the social skills that they needed, particularly for the youngsters in the team. That was really, really important. I used to host regularly at my house. I'd have dinner parties where I'd bring in some of the external stakeholders, county councillors and mayors, etc., chief constables, those sorts of people come along. I would make sure we were building a relationship with them, and I'd usually involve some of my senior officers in those. And then I'd do slightly bigger things with buffet suppers, where I'd have some more of my officers along, and we'll be doing a standard kind of fork supper event with typically local landowners or other people from the local area who were really interested in what we were doing and who we needed to keep on side. We're running a noisy airbase. We're a very big employer in the local area. There's lots of reasons why we needed to do that, and we needed to play our role as a stakeholder organisation within Lincolnshire. And it was really interesting at those social events how often it was an opportunity not just to do that kind of wider relationship building off the base, but also actually to build the social skills and the kind of emotional intelligence, I suppose, of the young officers that I had working for me. And they were really valuable. So never underestimate, I think, how important that kind of thing is, providing those social outlets that you can turn around and put people together to enable them to broaden their outlook and not just be talking purely to their friends, or in today's world, sitting there looking at a small screen every day. Actually, to really have some social interaction was hugely helpful. And a related element of that was, amongst lots of other things that we had on the base, we obviously had a number of chefs in all the different establishments. We still had RAF catering as a large part of what we did. That's largely gone now. Sadly, we're into a contract catering world in almost every unit. But one of the things that was really terrific, I had some award-winning, competition-winning chefs who, one or two of whom worked particularly in the Airman's Mess, who they would go and do catering competitions and produce these amazing culinary wonder works, really. One of them was a particularly sugar specialist. He would produce incredible, what looked like glass structures. They weren't. They were made of spun sugar and pulled sugar. And it was really useful to be able to turn around occasionally and give them an outlet for showcasing that in the station environment. So I can remember we had one day, we had an executive dinner for my team, where I said to the catering side of the organization, right, I want you to just challenge yourselves. You're going to go out, push the boat out, do what you can do. And it was a lovely night for us, because we obviously had a very enjoyable evening with a great meal. But that wasn't the point. The point was they really loved producing that. They loved showing the capability that they had, and getting obviously a round of applause at the end of it, and a lot of plaudits for it from the team, and just building the awareness amongst some of my executives about the talent and the capability amongst some of the people that we had on the base. And it's a little example, but it's very typically one of the things I think as a leader you can do, where you have people who have talent that is often there day to day and people don't really see it. Find a way to let them showcase it, let them get it out there and show it off a little bit, and be proud of what you do, and be proud of the achievements you have, the people you have, and shine a light on them wherever you can. That's it for this week. That's some of the leadership challenge stuff that I thought was worth bringing out, just in terms of the complexity of the base, the nature of the structures that we actually had, and some of those things around leading that very, very diverse group of people. Next time, we'll come back and we'll talk more specifically about some aspects of that. And and particularly, I think the next one I'm going to do here is building the Typhoon force, and talking about how we actually did that, what that meant, where some of the challenges were, where the successes were, and how far we got. I hope this has been interesting for you. And as ever, if you've enjoyed it, then please do leave me a review, subscribe, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks very much. Bye-bye. Thank you.